Welcome to our forum for candidates for representatives for Legislative District 44. This forum is co-presented by the League of Women Voters of Snohomish County and the Snohomish County Forum Coalition, whose members are C3 Coalition, AAUW, Edmonds College, the Daily Herald, KSER, KXIR, NAACP, Sultan School District, and Snow Owl Libraries. And thank you all for your continued support. I'm Nadine Shanti, League member, and I'm pleased to introduce my co-moderator, John Bauer. John is the opinion page editor of the Daily Herald, which is a longstanding League partner. Welcome, John.
Thank you, Nadine. And my thanks to the League and its partners for their considerable work in organizing and presenting these forums, and to our candidates for joining us. The Herald and its editorial board consider all elections, from school board races to presidential elections, to be of foundational importance to our democracy and good government. We, like the League, stress the importance of voting in all elections, but also the responsibility of all for informed voting. Prior to voting, we urge voters to consider not only the candidates' positions on various issues, but also their personal and professional experience, their preparedness for the office, and their commitment to community and democratic processes. During this forum, Zoom's chat function is not available, but we encourage voters, if they want to share their thoughts on what they've heard here, to write a letter to the editor. Letters can be submitted with phone number and city of residence to letters@heraldnet.com. We want to give a special thanks to our live stream sponsor, the Sultan School District, with technical help from Dave Moon and a terrific team of students at turkpride.tv. Let's thank them for their assistance in putting this together. To those in the virtual space, thank you for joining us. This forum will run about an hour. Today's questions were prepared with input from community members and are quite comprehensive. We won't be taking additional questions from our live audience for this event. The recording of the forum will be available on this same YouTube channel for later viewing.
Legislative District 44 includes Mill Creek, Snohomish, Cathcart, and Maltby. Candidates for representatives for Legislative District 44 are Brandy Donaghy and Mark Harmsworth for Washington State Representative Position 1, April Berg and Ryne Rohla for Washington State Representative Position 2. All candidates were invited. Mark Harmsworth is not participating in today's forum. The senatorial forum for District 44 with John Lovick and Jeb Brewer was recorded earlier today. We thank all candidates for running for office, for their willingness to serve if elected, and for their participation in this forum. The League is nonpartisan, so we don't endorse or oppose candidates or parties. We do educate and support voters and the election process in our communities. The rules for forum participation were sent ahead of time to all participants, and they have agreed to engage in respectful communication throughout the event. Let us briefly explain the question and answer period rules, and then we can begin. Each candidate will have either 60 or 90 seconds to respond. There will be one question that asks for a simple yes or no response, and it will not be timed. Don't worry, we will state these changes clearly. We are using a countdown timer visible to all candidates, and time limits on answers will be strictly enforced. We will change the starting order for each question, alternating candidates in the starting position to ensure a fair sequence. The order for the first question will be Ms. Donaghy, Mr. Rohla, April Berg. Let's begin. Candidates will have 60 seconds to respond. So Ms. Donaghy, what qualifications and experience make you a strong candidate for this position?
Thank you for asking that question. You know, I have had a number of experiences in various different areas. I, at one point, was a single parent working multiple jobs in order to make ends meet. And now I find myself in a position where I'm able to spend a lot of time volunteering and doing a lot of community service. I've served in the military. I've worked as a civilian. I have attended schools in a couple different states, and I've earned a degree locally at University of Washington, Bothell. I also serve on a number of committees and boards within the area, and I have really dedicated my life to public service. It is something that's very important to me, and I truly believe that when we have the opportunity to serve, we also have a responsibility to do so. And I know how lucky I am to be in a position where I can, and that's why I'm here today. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rohla, same question. Mr. Rohla?
Thank you. I'm Dr. Ryne Rohla. I'm a PhD. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm Dr. Ryne Rohla. I'm a PhD economist and Republican candidate for the State House. I'm a husband, father, and Snohomish County native. I currently work as an antitrust economist in the Washington State Attorney General's office, working to promote market competition and keep consumer prices as low as possible. My analysis has won tens of millions of dollars for Washington taxpayers. I previously taught economics at WSU and worked as a researcher at UCLA, publishing in top journals, including Science. My research focused on the economic and social impacts of political polarization. I also created one of the first national precinct-level election results data sets, leading to paid consulting work with the New York Times, Washington Post, and 538. As an economist, I believe I'm uniquely qualified to craft policy easing the burden of inflation on Washington's middle class and working families. As a moderate, I never hesitate to call out the extremes on either side of the aisle. I believe that's exactly what we need right now, a skilled moderate problem solver.
Thank you. Ms. Berg, same question.
Thank you so much. So I'm excited to be serving as your current representative from the 44th District. I am a former school board director for the Everett School District. I'm also a former director for the Edmonds District. I also have served as a planning commissioner for my local city right here in Mill Creek. I'm also a mother and a wife. I've got 2 Husky graduates, 2 Western graduates, 1 attending UW and 1 attending our local high school. I'm a former small business owner, and I am happy to say that I was able to pass in my short time in the legislature 8 bills that attacked everything from menstrual equity in our schools to lunch co-pays to helping create more businesses and more jobs and small businesses across our state. I'm excited to bring my unique blend of both public and private service back to the legislature in 2023.
Thank you. Please set the timer to 90 seconds. And this next question, we're going to start with you, Mr. Rohla. What are your priorities for the next legislative session?
Well, my first priority would be addressing inflation and high cost of living. The average Washington family has lost over $8,000 annually to inflation since the start of 2021. High cost of living, whether groceries or gas, healthcare or housing, they pull apart the rungs of the ladder of economic mobility and lock more and more out of achieving the American dream. Unfortunately, we can't subsidize and regulate our way to affordability. We need to enact smart, strategic, supply-oriented policies to increase competition and production while reducing inefficiencies and trade congestion. That's how we begin to bring costs down. My second priority would be restoring public safety. In the city of Everett, recent statistics show a 63% increase in robberies in the past year, and a 92% increase in gang-related crimes. Auto theft is up 80% statewide. And the recent home invasion and robbery turned murder of Ira Sock rocked my community. It occurred just 2 blocks from my house. It's not a coincidence that these increases, in my mind, occurred after 2021's sweeping restrictions on law enforcement. Whatever good intentions the legislature may have had been dwarfed by the harm caused by such laws. There's those restricting police pursuit that my opponents sponsor. This chart that I have right here, put together by the Washington Association of Police Chiefs and Sheriffs, shows the auto theft was basically flat up until the law was enacted, in which case it dramatically accelerated. While pursuits are not something I encourage or celebrate, this inflexible ban has put a green light to all criminals that now is open season. We need a common sense approach to law enforcement.
Thank you, Mr. Rohla. Ms. Berg, same question.
Thank you so much. So returning in 2023, my priorities will focus around public safety, education, as well as housing, and of course, fixing our upside down tax code. When it comes to public safety, we do have a responsibility to help communities. And I'm proud of the police accountability measures that we passed in our last legislative session. And there's absolutely more that we can do to help communities. One of the things I'm very proud to support is Senator Lovick's proposal to have joint training centers for local law enforcement placed regionally. In addition to that, I'll be working with our joint training center for police officers to have additional funding available for them to complete their higher ed aspirations. I think that's really important to encourage folks to get into that field. The second thing that I want to focus on is housing, and middle housing specifically. We need to do more to fix the issue that we have with the lack of middle housing. And I also want to tackle some of our issues with our upside down tax code. We know that Washington families are being hurt by inflation, as well as a tax code that simply does not meet folks where they are. I'm proud to be the Vice Chair of Finance, and I'm proud to continue my work in passing progressive tax reforms that help all families.
Thank you. Ms. Donaghy, your thoughts?
Thank you. So I tend to answer this question with a little bit of a cheat. I'm going to admit that, because my answer is resiliency. And resiliency kind of encompasses everything. It means making sure that people have the resources they need when they need them in order to be able to be safe, healthy, happy, and successful. It means making sure that we have access to education, making sure that we have access to housing, making sure that we have safe communities where we can feel comfortable. Also making sure that we're prepared for disasters when they strike, or small emergencies that might only impact one family or even one person, but have a huge, huge impact on their lives. It's important to me to make sure that every step that we take moving forward, everything that we do to work towards ensuring that all Washingtonians thrive, we're doing so in a way that does not leave anybody behind, and that does not create inadvertent issues that can make things more difficult for others. And that's one of the things that I think that I bring to the legislature, my ability to identify things that we're not always expecting we're going to find or even looking for. Thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Berg, we'd like to start with you on the next question. And it is, are you concerned about polarization in politics in Washington state? Why or why not?
So yes, I am. I'm concerned about polarization within all of our politics, but specifically in our state. I can tell you from personal experience, it's one of our main. It's a main issue with community safety. Frankly, the polarization has led to domestic terrorism and violence. And my concern is that people are taking politics to the extent where they're having violent reactions to political candidates or ideas, or simply talking beyond policy. And I'll tell you from personal experience, I've had folks on my campaign harassed. I've had signs defaced with hate symbols. I also have the unique experience of having a brother that served as a police officer on January 6th, protecting our nation's capital from the ultimate act of violent polarization in our nation's capital. So it absolutely is a problem. It's something that I have spoken out and really focused on in the legislature by supporting a proviso that was passed this last session to address domestic terrorism. Our AG will be looking at domestic terrorism in our state to see exactly what we can do as a state legislature in terms of policy prescriptives to get folks to really address domestic terrorism in communities. I'll just end on Snohomish County does have one of the highest rates of domestic terrorism across the nation. We're number 5 in the nation, so it is a problem.
Thank you. Ms. Donaghy, your thoughts?
I absolutely think it can be a huge issue. But one of the things that I find is a problem is that very often we end up on opposite sides of things because we don't necessarily speak the same language, or we're not understanding ideas to mean the same thing. Communication is a huge, huge issue when it comes to being able to work with other people. And that means, people that don't always agree with us. I served in the military, and one of the things that I learned there was that I didn't have an option to say, I don't like your ideology, so I don't want to work with you. We worked with explosives and aircraft. And the reality was that if we decided not to work together as a team because we believed in different things, somebody could die. And I think when it comes down to it, we all want the same things. We want our communities to be happy, healthy, productive, and safe. We don't always agree on how to get there. We don't always agree exactly on what that looks like. But if we can start at a point where we recognize that, we can make great strides working together and being able to move forward. Because as a representative, I represent everybody in my community, not just the people that I agree with.
Thank you. Mr. Rohla, same question.
I first want to say that I thought that was a really good answer. I absolutely agree that political polarization is a big issue. As I said, it was my primary research agenda when I was in academia. And in Washington, we definitely have a lot of extremes. We can look at people like Joe Kent down in Southwest Washington who wants Anthony Fauci thrown in prison. You can obviously see all the election fraud conspiracies everywhere and things like that. There's also, I think, a fair amount of extremism on the left too. It's a little different. I think you can see it sometimes in people like Nicole Thomas-Kennedy and Kashama Sawant. I think that in both cases, though, a lot of the extremism comes from a very deeply ingrained sense of alienation from an individual's agency. I think that people feel like they can't really control their own destinies. They can't control the way that the world is going. They feel that the forces have moved it beyond their control. And I think that if we want to actually reduce the temperature in politics, we need to ensure that people feel like they can affect their own lives. And I think that we can certainly start on a personal level by practicing humility and empathy, primarily, discussing issues with facts and logic instead of purely on emotion. And I think that we need to stop viewing ourselves as victims.
Thank you. The next question goes first to you, Ms. Donaghy. What, if anything, should be done to mitigate concerns about climate change in Washington State?
Yeah, I think that we have one planet. We have one chance to get it right. And we have gone from a society where we were causing great damage to one that's now more aware of the damage. And we do have the opportunity to make changes to make things better. I have kids, and eventually I may have grandkids, and I want them to be able to breathe and to live and to thrive here in Washington or wherever they choose. And in order to do that, we need to change the way we're doing some things. We need to look at how we are working with construction and making sure that we're using greener practices. We need to look at how we are creating our energy and working towards greener practices as well, because our population is also growing. And as that happens, we use more. We need to really start to think about how we can exist in partnership with our environment as opposed to by dominating it. The 44th is an incredibly diverse area. We've got city, we've got farms. We need to preserve that. We need to preserve what we can.
Thank you. Mr. Rohla, same question.
So I do believe that climate change is a very serious issue for our state. And I think it's one that, because it is so important, needs to be addressed with a clear and rational eye. The fact is that per capita carbon emissions in the United States are the lowest they've been in 100 years, but East Asian countries continue to increase emissions. Even if we push our state's emissions to zero, the climate will continue to warm. The only actions that we can take by ourselves to reduce global carbon levels would be something like heavily sequestering carbon through reforestation or technological means, which is something I would like to see pursued, but I think we have to acknowledge the limited efficacy of our unilateral actions. And because of that, I think that some of the more aggressive climate proposals that people have been putting forward in the state don't really pass a rational cost-benefit analysis. They place enormous burdens on working families and commuters when there are actions that you can take that don't involve slashing living wage jobs or increasing electricity prices or making housing construction more expensive. Some of the things I would propose would be protecting carbon sinks and limiting mass carbon releases, such as uncontrolled wildfires, through active forest management, which means more selective cuts and controlled burns. I believe we need to improve how we transmit and store electricity, and I believe we must invest in the wholesale upgrade of our electric grid and high-capacity transmission lines. And I'm also strongly opposed to reducing our low-cost, low-carbon hydroelectric capacity by removing the Snake River dams, which I have seen will increase residential electricity rates by about 10%. I think that a moral climate change policy achieves the most while harming the least.
Thank you. Ms. Berg, your ideas.
Thank you so much. So I'm really proud of what the legislature has done in terms of climate solutions, but there's more to do. And I will say that we need to be very focused on blue-green transitions. So these are transitions that think about the climate, but think about working families as well. I believe that that is the direction that we are moving in our state. And I'm proud to be at the forefront of some of that work. Some of the items that I was promoting and happy to vote for were industrial symbiosis. That's where you have one industry's waste is another industry's resource. And one of my bills directly talks about using industrial symbiosis as we create jobs in our rural communities to ensure that they are climate friendly. Another issue, very big issue, is transportation. I'm a big advocate of public transit that really does decrease our carbon footprint overall. It may seem as though we are on an island trying to do something that seems insurmountable, but it's absolutely not. And it's all of our responsibility, especially as policymakers, to put forth good policies that can be done within communities that really will help us as our climate continues to warm. I will say one of the focuses for me is around transit, housing around density and transportation options. And I think that is something that as we move forward, we need to look at more solutions to get less people on the roads and taking more climate friendly options for transportation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rohla, we'll start with you for the next question. What do you see as three good ideas for reducing the danger of violent firearm incidents?
So gun violence has affected me quite personally. My little sister Leah shot and killed herself in January 2021. And suicides, it's a very, very personal issue to me. And suicides make up about 2/3 of gun deaths. And if we're going to ever tackle that, we need to really tackle mental health. And I think that that is something we are making progress in. I'm grateful for the new 988 number, for example. One thing that I think that we could do in terms of mental health is medication prescribing authority, expanding that. I have a friend whose daughter is bipolar, and she recently moved home from college during the pandemic, and she couldn't find a psychiatrist taking new patients anywhere in Snohomish County or King County. Her meds prescription expired and she couldn't get any more, and she ultimately tried to take her life. Fortunately, she did survive, but I absolutely think that opening up the legal authority to prescribe certain medications, especially for renewals, to psychologists and some social workers might ease some congestion there. Obviously not all gun violence is self-inflicted. Most gun crimes that do occur are done with stolen firearms. We've seen a very large surge in firearm theft in the last year. Unfortunately, Snohomish County does a very poor job of prosecuting illegal firearms possession cases. Only about 1/3 go to prosecution. I think we could prevent a substantial amount of gun violence simply by enforcing our existing laws and putting the needs of victims ahead of perpetrators. I also support school resource officers and more investment in school physical security.
Thank you, Brian, and again, condolences for your loss. Ms. Berg, same question for you.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I'm proud that I've supported many common sense gun legislative moves to keep firearms out of the hands of individuals who should not have them. And so I've supported things like red flag laws, as well as the limit on high capacity rounds. As a mom and a former school board director, I know all too well that firearm and firearm violence is a true threat to our students. What we need to do, the next step, if you will, is really looking at assault rifles and looking at a potential eliminating or reducing the folks who can have access to those high capacity magazine firearms. It's a real tough one for me because there are mental health implications. There are things that we need to do around mental and behavioral health, but truly we need to limit who has access to firearms so that they cannot inflict self-harm or harm within their community. Our children deserve better than what we've done. And as a policymaker, I just take it as my utmost responsibility to ensure the safety of all of our folks in community from gun violence. It's horrific, but it is a challenge that we must meet in this time.
Thank you. And Ms. Donaghy.
Thank you. So as a veteran, I have a healthy understanding and respect for weapons and weapon systems. And one of the things that I think is probably key is access. It's important to recognize that there is a massive amount of gun violence that is either self-inflicted or accidental in homes where there are firearms and they are not properly secured. We have seen incidents where children have accidentally accessed handguns and shot other people. And it's not out of maliciousness, it was because they had access to those firearms. I really think responsible gun ownership is important, being responsible with firearms, making sure that they are kept safe and out of the hands of those who should not have access to them because of mental health issues or otherwise, or age, or not having the capacity to handle them safely. You know, it's important to note that when we talk about violent crimes being committed with stolen firearms, they came from somewhere, and not all of them are secure.
Thank you. Ms. Berg, in your opinion, is there sufficient access to behavioral health care in Snohomish County and the rest of the state? If yes, would you recommend any modifications to programs? If no, what would you prioritize to increase access?
Thank you for that question. And we do not have adequate resources for behavioral health in our county. It's truly at a crisis point, and as a policymaker, it's one of the things that is top of mind as we go through the budgeting process as well as the bill making process to ensure that we can increase access at every level. I'm proud that last session we did do those increases for mental health counselors in our schools. We added additional funding, but truly it's not enough. We are at a point in our county and frankly across the state where we need more access, more funding, more training, more folks getting trained. Families across the state are truly having a horrific time accessing the counseling they need, the services they need, and frankly, some of the inpatient services that they need for their loved ones as well. Having also lost a family member to suicide, it is something that is always top of mind. Things like 988 has been truly life-saving for so many people who are utilizing that service, that I'm thankful for it, but it's just the beginning. So we do need to do more in our county. And as a policymaker, I'm committed to getting additional resources to all of our communities for behavioral and mental health services.
Thank you. Ms. Donaghy.
Thank you. So as some people know, and maybe others don't, I am the mother of a child with selective mutism and autism. That means that he requires access to certain types of behavioral health care to help him be able to work his way through this world in a way that works for both him and those he interacts with. And the reality is that we have been waiting for months and months and months to be able to find a therapist for him. We can't, because there aren't enough. And the primary issue, I mean, there are all sorts of pieces that go with it, but one of the primary issues is that we simply do not have enough providers. And there are all sorts of reasons we don't have enough providers. It's because healthcare providers don't necessarily feel safe and welcome within our system, because we don't always have appropriate staffing rules. It's because some of the state insurance does not reimburse at a high enough level to allow healthcare providers to survive. It's because we don't have enough people in the pipeline who are training to become providers in the first place so that this care can be accessed. And that's probably the first thing we need to tackle.
Thank you. Mr. Rohla.
Yeah, so my brother-in-law used to be a child and family therapist for CMAR here in Everett. And like so many other mental health care providers, burned out because they're overworked, they're not paid enough, and it just seems like so little that they do actually makes a difference in people's lives, just for a lot of various reasons. I think that the mental health healthcare system is a lot like the rest of the healthcare system, in that there's way too much money going to administration and not enough money going to the actual frontline workers who are doing the essential jobs of the industry. And I think that we have some rather restrictive scope of practice laws that limit the interchangeability of people with different types of degrees and different types of education to do different jobs that I think are unnecessary. And I think that those are things that should be addressed. I also know that there are some issues with when people try to pay in cash for behavioral health care, and there are there's a lot of issues that need to be addressed.
Thank you. Great. And I'm sorry, I lost my place here. Ms. Berg. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I'm
Ms.
sorry.
Donaghy.
Yeah, yes, Ms. Donaghy, I'm sorry.
How would you propose the housing question?
Okay, it didn't end up in the chat. I was watching.
Oh, I can repeat it.
Quite all right. Yeah, actually, go ahead. I'll let you repeat it.
All right, thank you. What do you propose to make, I'm sorry. In your opinion, is there sufficient access to behavioral health care in Snohomish County?
No,
And across, oh, did we do that one? I'm
Yes.
sorry. All right, I did get mixed up here. How would you propose to make housing or rent more affordable in our area?
Oh boy, so that's tricky. One of the biggest issues that we have in Washington State is that we do not have enough housing. I mean, that's the key issue, right? We are 250,000 homes short for the number of people or households that we have. When we look at access to housing, we very often focus on people who are unhoused, those who we see who sleep on the streets or in tents or in shelters, but we don't recognize that there are probably many more who are couch surfing, who are still in hotels, staying with family, but don't really have permanent addresses. So that's one of the issues that we have, probably the biggest issue, and that's just stock. One of the ways to drive down prices is to increase the supply. I mean, that's typical supply and demand. And that is something that I think we need to be spending a lot of time working on. When it comes to affordable housing, I think we need to be working on forming some additional public-private partnerships in order to ensure that we are creating housing that's going to be accessible to those who are priced out of the market. And at the same time, we also have to be looking at increasing access to housing for people who are in, market rate, able to pay market rates, because it's really all across the board that we're missing what we need.
Yeah, thank you. And again, my apologies. Mr. Rohla, same question. Your suggestions for affordable housing in rent?
Yeah, I also agree. Housing affordability is a huge issue. I'm a renter myself, and I would like to one day buy a house. Housing prices have actually started to come down in the last few weeks and months as the Fed raises interest rates, and that's going to do a lot to affect housing prices. But locally, we need to increase the housing supply, like Randy said. It's currently being held back by zoning, permitting, and construction costs. I think there's a clear unmet demand for denser, walkable housing, and I believe that we should meet this demand by relaxing zoning regulations in urban areas. I do think we need more mixed use and middle housing. I think this is an area where there's probably a lot of agreement between the three of us. I don't think that we need to mandate more expensive housing construction techniques. I don't think that we need things like rent control, which have time and again been shown to lower the housing supply and exacerbate shortages. If I may briefly touch on homelessness, I'd say that most of the visible homelessness that we see results from mental illness and drug addiction, not housing prices. I think the housing first approach does have some merit, but unfortunately it too often devolves into housing only, which I think just enables addiction and makes people's lives worse. I do think that we need to focus on treatment, and I'm very proud of the success, for example, that the Snohomish County Jail has for their medication-assisted treatment programming of fentanyl, and I think that's something that needs to be expanded statewide.
Thank you. And Ms. Berg.
Thank you so much. And so housing, yes, it is a supply issue, and I am a housing first candidate. I believe that until you solve that problem for someone, it's really hard to dive into any of the other issues that they have. That said, when we look at housing, we have to look at all aspects of it: low income housing, workforce housing, as well as market rate housing. And there is a need in our county, in our community, for all three types of housing. I was happy to support a bill that addressed specifically middle housing this last session. It did not make it over the finish line, but I know that as we are in the interim, we've been working on tweaks to it. So we will see another iteration of it. What that bill will do is allow for housing around transit and denser housing around transit. And so it will basically create zoning that is specific to those areas to increase housing density where you have regular transit, regular being at least at 15-minute intervals. And as we see things like light rail and more swift buses coming into our community, having housing around those transit points will be necessary. Once we can increase that type of housing, it will be kind of a high wave lifts all boats scenario. And when we have more supply, we will enable hopefully rents as well as pricing to go down. But it really is a supply issue, but not just at one level. We must look at low workforce as well as market rate housing in this discussion.
Thank you. And our next question, we'll start with Mr. Rohla. What are your ideas for ensuring that sufficient infrastructure is built or planned for in surrounding areas to support proposed development?
Yeah, that is a tough question. I live currently just outside of the city limits of the city of Everett. And there's a pretty big discontinuity when you go from incorporated Snohomish County to unincorporated Snohomish County. You see your sidewalks and you have your streetlights. And I think that probably the majority of the people of the 44th district live in unincorporated Snohomish County. I think that we need to have more planning dedicated specifically to unincorporated areas in a way that we don't have currently. And I think that especially for areas within urban developments. Beyond that, I don't know that I have any shattering
Okay, thank you. Ms. Berg.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's an important question. As we look at our increase in population, as we look at the need for increased housing, we have to talk about infrastructure. And the 44th is unique in the sense that we have 2 incorporated cities and a lot of unincorporated. A lot of that planning does fall to the county, and some of it is dictated by the GMA. And I really do believe that as we are going into another cycle of comprehensive planning for a lot of our cities, depending on the size, as well as our counties, we need to look at the infrastructure demands and requirements that are going to be looking us dead in the face as our population increases. As far as when I think about that, we have to think about the climate. We have to think about how do we do this in a way that we can have an all-in approach so that we do have housing for all, as well as understanding the climate constraints that we're up against. So I think for me, my ideas really center around working with our local municipalities, working with our local planning divisions, and making sure at the state level, as state policymakers, we're giving them the tools they need, both in terms of policy as well as funds. It's going to be a very important period the next year or so as we look at some of the comprehensive planning processes, and infrastructure, and the infrastructure that goes with growth is going to be top of mind for all of our cities and our counties.
Thank you. And Ms. Donaghy.
Thank you. So, when we look at infrastructure, when we're talking about growth, I tend to go probably in a slightly different direction than a lot of people because I have a background in emergency and disaster planning and preparedness. And that is that as we are building, we really need to make sure that we are creating the needed infrastructure in the appropriate places so that not only will they support the communities and the growth in every day, but also so that when we do face our next major disaster, like a earthquake or volcanic eruptions, that people actually have access to what they need. One of the really cool things about, Western Washington in general is the geography, because there's a lot of rivers, there are a lot of bridges, there are mountain passes, and all sorts of areas that are actually pretty challenging if you've just gone through a major earthquake or something. So my focus tends to be, when we're talking about that infrastructure, is making sure, hey, if we've got this community here, do we also have access to a medical clinic that can become a trauma center? Do we have access to a grocery store so that people don't have to be on the road for hours, or so that if the bridges are out, they can still access food? Do we have access to buildings that are also safe for shelters? All of those pieces.
Okay, thank you. You did a great job there. Ms. Berg, you talked earlier about what you called our upside down tax system. So let's talk about taxes, and I'd like to start with you. Do you believe the taxing system in Washington state is equitable and sufficient to meet the needs of the state and local communities? If not, what changes would you propose?
Yeah, thank you for that. And I do not believe our current taxing system is equitable, neither to individuals or to our business community. We overly rely on non-progressive taxing sources such as sales tax, which in essence allows for the majority of Washingtonians who are at the very highest income levels to pay less in taxation than Washingtonians who are at the very lowest. And so that's what I mean by when I say upside down tax code. One of the things I am looking forward to is the report from the Joint Tax Structure Work Group. It's bipartisan, bicameral, and they'll be coming up with some revenue neutral solutions to our dilemma on taxation in our state. That said, one of the things I will be focusing on is a wealth tax. And frankly, that means taxing the folks at the very highest amounts of revenue. We had a proposal that didn't get across the finish line last session that would tax billionaires. It would be your first billion would not be taxed, but that second billion would be taxed. And that's what we mean when we talk about wealth. We're not talking about high income. We're talking about absolute wealth and taxing that wealth in a meaningful way so that we can provide things like special education, developmental disability services, and frankly, close some holes in a lot of gaps that we have in our state budget because we are not taxing folks at the right level in the right way. So that's one of the ideas I'll have, and I'll be looking forward to the work group's findings.
Thank you. Ms. Donaghy, your thoughts?
You know, I want to start off by saying I would actually be okay with having my second $1 billion of income taxed. I'd be totally down with that. I'm sure most of us really would, because we're nowhere near that. And, you know, it is true. Our tax code is incredibly regressive. It means that the people who can least afford it are really carrying most of the burden. And that is something that we need to change if we really want to be able to create a Washington where everybody can thrive and everybody can be the best that they can be. Now, I'm going to be honest here. I am not a tax expert. It is not something that excites me. I am incredibly, incredibly lucky to have a seatmate who knows so much about it, because that means that I have somebody that I can go to when there is something that I need to understand. All that aside, you know, I think we do need to really consider not only how we are bringing in our revenue, because, you know, we are taxing those who can least afford it, but also really pay attention to the impacts that they have. One of the things that comes up a lot when I talk to people is actually property tax. And we see a lot of people who are seniors who are being taxed out of their homes, and they can't sell their property and go somewhere else because there's nowhere to go. Yet they're paying as much in tax as they did when they purchased their home, like actual cost. So.
Thank you. Mr. Rohla, same question, please.
So Washington undoubtedly places far more tax burden on working families than on the wealthy. But you know, the voters of Washington have repeatedly and strongly rejected a state income tax and something like a wealth tax as well. This policy was championed for years by Republicans in the legislature, but was only recently funded. I would support a heavier utilization of that credit and similar credits. Broadly, I also agree that the system is far from ideal. You know, I'm not a big fan of state B&O tax, which on the surface claims to tax companies, but really is passed through as a second hidden sales tax disproportionately affecting low-income people. I think we should, at a minimum, allow businesses to write off expenses from their B&O tax liability, but I prefer that tax is just replaced entirely. I'm actually quite open to many different alternatives.
Okay, we're having a little bit of a problem. Mr. Rohla, are you back?
I'm back. Sorry, where was I?
I think you had about 10 seconds left. Is that something you'd like to say?
Oh, I was just going to say that I'm open to many different alternative proposals for tax systems. I'm even potentially open to something like a carbon tax. But I think that it needs to meet 3 criteria. One is that it doesn't place an outsized burden on the working class. 2, it follows the state's constitution, which I don't think, for example, the capital gains tax does. And I think it has to be something that ultimately the voters can live with, that they can approve. I don't think that that's been the rubric that we've been using in Washington for a while now. And I think that we can do better than that.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Donaghy, we're going to go to you first. This is the question that we said was going to demand just a yes or a no response. So it's not going to be timed. So we're asking you really to just give us a yes or no. And this regards voting options. So our question is, do you support ranked choice voting as a voting option? Yes or no? Ms. Donaghy, that's you.
Yeah, I'm trying to, there's always caveats for me. I'll say yes.
Thank you. Mr. Rohla?
Yes.
Ms. Berg?
Yes.
Thank you all. Appreciate it. Okay, and timer, we're still at 90 seconds. And this question is going to go to you, Mr. Rohla. And our timer is really paying attention to you. If we need to, we'll start you again. Would you support making any changes to existing state laws or the state constitution regarding access to abortion? Why or why not? And if yes, what changes would you propose?
So as I was just mentioning in the tax question, I think that having the approval of the voters is a critical thing to such big and important and emotionally charged policies as this. Washington's laws on abortion access were instituted by multiple votes of the people. I don't believe it's the role of legislatures to overturn the will of the people. It was wrong when Republicans tried to do it on January 6th. It was wrong when Democrats pushed for stake income tax. And I think it's wrong if we try to do that on abortion. I think that it's up to the voters to decide if they want to change the law in any way on the issue of abortion. I don't think it's the unilateral role of the legislature. As a matter of personal conscience, I wish to see as few abortions as possible. Abortion rates had been falling for 30 years up until the pandemic, but they've actually started to rise again. So my view is that we must address the root causes which drive people to seek abortion in the first place, and that's not something any legal ban could ever do. And so I would propose that the three key ways of doing this are supporting contraceptive access and age-appropriate comprehensive sex ed, working hard to reduce the financial costs of childbearing and parenting while increasing the supply of childcare, and supporting the rights of pregnant workers and students. I think that our education system in particular is particularly biased against pregnant students. And I think that these are areas where we can find a lot of common ground between the two.
Thank you. Ms. Berg, same question.
Yeah, so I am a pro-choice candidate, and I believe that I'm excited and happy that our voters have enshrined the right to an abortion in our state, but I also believe that we can go a step further and have it enshrined in our Constitution. I do believe that as policymakers, we must also keep an eye on protecting our doctors who perform such procedures, as well as the patients who are right now streaming over our borders to receive basic health care. Abortion is health care. And so at every step, we must be conscious and aware to protect that health care right and ability for everyone in our state. And like I said, folks who are coming here from out of state. So as a policymaker, I'll be looking at things like data privacy for our folks who use different apps and use different social media, protecting not only their data and their privacy, but the companies that are allowing them to have privacy. Also protecting our doctors when they perform such procedures and they want to go to another state, making sure they're not targeted. So we do have a long way to go to make sure everyone is protected so that this basic healthcare right is available and safe for everyone who performs it, who receives it. Abortion is healthcare, and I believe everything we can do to help individuals who are seeking that care to be safe and have accessibility is what we must do as policymakers.
Thank you. Ms. Donaghy, your thoughts, please.
I agree. Reproductive care is healthcare. Reproductive rights are important. Recognizing that all of those who can become pregnant do not cease to be full human beings with full rights. That's important. The fact that I can have a child does not mean that I should have to give up my right to privacy. It does not mean that I should have to give up my right to make my own medical decisions. That is something that is incredibly important. And I believe that we do need to make sure that we are doing anything and everything we can to ensure those rights for those who follow. In politics, control ebbs and flows, right? But there are certain things that I think we really need to make sure do not flow based on the mood of those who are legislating. We have seen the voters of Washington have told us what is important to them. And we have a responsibility to make sure that that is preserved.
Thank you.
Thank you. And a related question, starting with Ms. Berg. As independent healthcare systems merge with religious healthcare systems, do you have concerns about the about limits to healthcare options at those facilities?
I do, and thank you for that question. I have grave concerns. I believe that healthcare, especially in our rural communities, is really dictated by some of the hospitals, potentially just one hospital for very large swaths of communities. And when they're merged with, let's say, a hospital or a unit that has specific religious beliefs, that those beliefs don't dictate, say you can't do this or you can't do that, that really does impact the quality, the service, the accessibility to things like abortions, things like death with dignity. And so again, as policymakers, it's our job to step in and say, whoa, we have to make sure that healthcare is accessible to everyone in every community. Just because a specific hospital has a specific religious belief does not mean that everybody who comes through the doors of that hospital, again, potentially the only hospital available to many of our folks in rural communities, it doesn't mean that everyone who comes through that door has that same religious belief. So I'm very concerned with it. What I'll be looking to are my colleagues on the healthcare committee. I know they are meeting as we speak about different options and opportunities in policy to help patients access all of their healthcare options and needs in every facility. And so it should not be dictated by religious vigor or edict. It should be based on a person's healthcare needs.
Thank you. Ms. Donaghy.
I really do think that when an organization provides a public service, that it does need to be done in a way that is neutral. As stated, we don't always have a choice as to where we go. We need to know that any facility that we go to, we're able to access the type of care that we need. And not care that is dictated only by specific people and specific moral codes over medicine. So when it comes to it, I do think it is incredibly important that we are making sure that people still have the right to make their own healthcare decisions when they are faced with a system that is religious or otherwise. Because care shouldn't be dictated by the CEO. It should be determined what is necessary by the doctor and the patient.
Thank you. And Mr. Rohla.
So this is actually something that I know quite a bit about. All the healthcare merger notifications for the state of Washington go through the Attorney General's office through my division, and I review many of them. I reviewed the recent Virginia Mason Franciscan merger, for example, which is, I believe, what this question is based off of. And I think it's important to remember that the vast majority of abortions do not occur in hospital settings, they occur in outpatient settings. When we reviewed the Virginia Mason merger, we asked them, how many abortions did you perform in the last 5 years? And they said 3. Then we asked Franciscan, how many of those abortions would have been barred under your ethical and religious directives? And they said 0. The truth is that most Catholic hospital systems don't ban emergent abortions. So I think that this is a bit of an overblown issue. I don't think that this is something that's going to dramatically alter the landscape of reproductive health care in Washington. I would say that if we are concerned about monopolization and about the lack of competition in healthcare, that perhaps that means that we should do more to expand competition within healthcare more broadly. And I think that would be a good, that's an important area in order to decrease healthcare costs. I think that one way you can do that is by repealing the Certificate of Need program, which allows existing hospitals and clinics to capture the basically DOH and prevent new hospitals and clinics from forming as competitors. And I think there are other similar policies.
Thank you. And our final question, and we'll start with Ms. Donaghy. What additional issues or information would you like to bring to the attention of the community?
Well, you know, one of the things that I mentioned before is that I have a bit of a background in emergency preparedness. And one of the things that I think is really important is that we recognize that the experience with the pandemic has really demonstrated that we as a state and also in our individual communities are not actually ready for a major disaster. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done in order to assure that we are. When I talk about resiliency, I talk about not only making sure that people have what they need in their day-to-day lives, but also what they need to be able to stand up after disaster. And we have been, well, really bad at making sure that those things are in place to ensure that people are safe and able to recover quickly and move on with their lives. 10 seconds, so thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Rohla.
A lot of people are scared right now, scared to check gas prices with their 401k, that tonight's the night their car will be broken into, whether tomorrow another right will meet its end, or if our democracy will survive another election. We're told that this is the most important election of our lifetimes, and then we're told the same thing 2 years later. Well, I'm tired of voting out of fear. I'm tired of voting for the candidate who turns my stomach the least. I'm tired of settling for second best. For once in my life, I want an election between two great choices. Both sides can hold their heads up high and proudly say that this is the best of what our party stands for. I don't know if I can claim that to reach that standard, but that's what I strive for. Real policies, not partisan dogma, facts, not conspiracies, empathy and humility, not victimization and self-righteousness. That is the only way that we'll ever build a future that works better for all Washingtonians. And that is the only thing that I care about. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. Berg.
Thank you so much. I want to start by thanking the League of Women Voters for this forum. It's been informative and it's something I look forward to each election cycle. I would like to mention, because I didn't get it in earlier, is that I am the sole endorsement for the Washington State Fraternal Order of Police. And I'm starting with that because it's an important endorsement. It's one that they've given me because they know that I'm here and I've been a good partner to keep our community safe. And public safety is top of mind for so many of our neighbors and community members here in the 44th. I look forward to going back to Olympia to represent you for another exciting session with exciting bills and bill priorities that focus on things like public safety, education, and jobs. I am your kitchen table candidate focusing on kitchen table issues, and I will always be available and accessible to you as a community. Again, thank you for your time tonight, listening to our answers, and thank you to my fellow candidates for participating in democracy.
Thank you. The League and Forum Coalition appreciates the candidates for joining us and for running for office. A recording of this forum and others will be available on the League of Women Voters of Snohomish County website and its YouTube channel as well. You can find links at lwvsnoho.org. We encourage you to explore additional information about these and all candidates. The Snohomish County Voters Pamphlet will be mailed to residents starting October 8th. Vote411.org, sponsored by the League of Women Voters, is another good source for nonpartisan voting information. You can also find answers to additional questions in the Daily Herald.
Ballots will be mailed on October 20th, and Election Day is November 8th. Please be a voter. We thank the Snohomish County Forum Coalition members and the League team who coordinated this forum. A special thank you again to Dave Moon and his team of students at Turk Pride TV at the Salton School District for their excellent technical support. And of course, thanks to all of you for watching and listening. This concludes our candidate forum.